Forensic scientists of Reddit, what is the most WTF case that you ever had? A friend of mine is a CSI, and I don't know if he's posted here, but just in case he hasn't, I'll put this here. Anchorage, Alaska, 2008. A 27-year-old woman hasn't paid her rent in 4 months. The landlord gave her a bit of a reprieve because he knew she was very poor and she was in low-income housing. But after 4 months of zero contact, enough is enough, and he calls the cops to get into her place and either see her to talk or change the locks and remove her stuff to a storage shed so the apartment can be released to someone else. The cops find the front door to be bolted, and use the landlord's key to get in, then find the woman dead in her shower. Just sort of slumped as if she fell against the wall and slid down. The water wasn't on, and as this is Alaska in the winter, the water is never shut off by the city because if hot water isn't moving through the pipes they freeze and burst. The fact that her shower is off means she never turned it on, or someone turned it off. The body is taken to the morgue and autopsied at the family's request because no obvious means of death can be found. As far as the examination could conclude, she died from an adrenal surge causing her heart to stop. More commonly known as frightened to death, which yes, can actually happen in some rare cases. The body was old, but no test showed any residual drugs in her system, none were found in the apartment, nor was any sign of anyone having entered or left before the cops. The young pretty average health woman appears to have gotten into her shower, and then her heart stopped due to terror. As far as I know, that's where the story ends. No substantial leads. A friend of mine is a forensic scientist and her department dealt with burglary cases only. Usually generating pretty uninteresting stuff to tell people. But her only good story is that once she got a pair of gloves found at the crime scene, she went to examine them and felt that there was something hard inside. She turned the gloves up to get it out, and out falls a thumb, ripped off at the first joint. Apparently this particular burglar was holding up a safe while his mate went underneath it, dropped the safe on his hands, ripped his hands out and ran. They obviously caught the guy. Professor showed a case where a guy committed suicide by holding 2 forks on a table then proceeded to headbang towards it. Stuck both his eyes in. Not a forensic scientist, surprise, but my mom knew a lady whose son committed suicide pretty brutally. While the parents were out, he got a shotgun from the gun cabinet, went to his room, and set it up with string and pulleys on a chair so that it would go off when the bedroom door was opened. He sat in the chair for what may have been hours. Parents get home, mom goes to check on son, bang. That poor woman needed some serious counseling. I can't imagine the guilt. And it was pretty crappy of the kid to make one of his parents unwittingly do the dirty work for him. Father-in-law is a cop. Years ago, he got called to a scene of a suicide by hanging. The body had been there for a while. Apparently the deceased had managed to do quite a bit of damage to his neck vertebrae, because his spine had snapped and his neck stretched down several feet from the noose. The cops at the scene took pictures of giraffe neck and passed them around the department. Somehow, my wife saw the pictures when she was at the tender age of 12, which screwed her up good enough to be a suitable mate for a guy like me. A friend is a psychologist whose previous life was in crime scene photography. She went to the scene of a suicide in a garage. This guy had a project car that he had worked on his whole life. When he decided to end it all, he wanted to go with the car, so he shut the garage and turned on the engine and waited. To top it off, he had taken a bunch of pain and sleeping pills. When my friend got there, it was a good while after his death. EMTs and other specialists were there looking for details and whatnot. He was the VP of a fairly large chain of local businesses, so there was an insurance settlement to consider. My friend is in the middle of photographing the scene and the guy was laying there, pronounced dead hours ago, and he suddenly just shook hard. She thought it was a death rattle, so she kept taking pictures. Eventually the guy sat up and nodded and the EMTs were called back in to stabilize him and eventually save him. Apparently the car had run out of gas right at the moment he went out and he was pronounced dead on the scene. He couldn't talk or do much, but he had actually survived. Forensic chemist here, who occasionally gets called out to crime scenes just to consult on evidence collection. On the first one I ever went on, a father had shot his adult son and put the body in a deep freeze that was in his bedroom. There were a ton of cops and other people from our lab there, but when the coroner asked for help removing the body from the freezer, I volunteered quickly, as I had never been that close to a dead body, other than funerals, and was curious. As I helped the coroner lift the body out of the freezer, which still had a bunch of food in it too, a pack of frozen biscuits was stuck to his body. I had to pry them off of him, which was both very weird and kind of funny at the same time. I interned at the office of the chief medical examiner when I was 18. Saw a lot of interesting stuff, learned a lot of interesting things. One case stuck with me more than the rest. I arrived one morning, went down to the basement where bodies were laid out for rounds every morning. On tables lay the usual, a couple folks who died in a hospital and needed a partial autopsy to sign off on a death certificate, a drug overdose, a drug murder. Then, on one table, there was a blue Tupperware bin. A big one. About 3'X3'X2. It was filled with concrete, and out of the edges a little plastic wrap was lining between the concrete and the bin, and then out of the top of the concrete a couple toes were poking out. The story was out in the county. A family saw a small fire in the woods outside of their house, called the fire department, and after putting out the flames, they found this bin. When we cracked the bin open we found half of a man, about from the belly button down. Someone had thought the best way to dispose of this body would be to cut it in half, wrap it in plastic, put it in a Tupperware bin, fill the bin with concrete, and set it on fire. What they had really done was essentially cook the body in an oven, with the plastic wrap acting as a roasting bag. Skin was sloughing off of the legs and feet, and the skin was discolored by this time, a nice green. Though this was about 10 years ago, I distinctly remember still being able to make out saw marks on the top edge of this half. However, notes were taken, and no signs of death were found on the legs, and no indications of the person's identity either. Unfortunately, my internship ended a few weeks before they found the top half, so I never got to learn more about the case, but the image still certainly sticks with me till now. Not a forensic scientist, but a true story is good all the same. Officer I used to know was telling me of this kid's suicide. The parents had left for the day and the kid decided enough is enough. He grabbed his dad's shotgun and sat down on the sofa. With the shotgun in his mouth, he pulled the trigger. Blood, brain, and teeth covered the entire room and ceiling. The blast created a huge hole in the back of his head. Since the gun was in his mouth, he just sort of slid down the barrel. The parents come home and walk in to see their son sitting on the couch, shotgun in his mouth with the barrel protruding out of the back of his skull. I regularly post on Unsolved Mysteries, so I thought his was fitting here. One of the best cases on Forensic Files was Cold Case that had gone unsolved for decades. A man told police he had picked up a hitchhiker in the evening. After the man and the hitchhiker got into a fight, the man threw him out of his car 2 miles away from his mother's house on a busy highway. The man later came home to his mother's house only to find the hitchhiker at his mother's house. He left to go call police from a pay phone. This was before cell phones. The police found his mother dead in bed. The man was a beneficiary of a huge life insurance policy and was the prime suspect. The cops or anyone did not believe the man's story. It was inconceivable that the hitchhiker, who did not know where the mother's house was, could make a 2-mile journey with turns in a neighborhood to just randomly break in and kill the man's mother, who he didn't know. But there was blood at the scene and a palm print on the staircase that was not the man's nor the mother's. After some investigation, people at Hardee's did confirm that there was a man that fit the description looking to hitchhike. Still, they just assumed the man had paid the other man to kill his mother. 15 years later, after the invention of CODIS, the DNA was matched to a career criminal who definitely matched the description of the hitchhiker. After bringing him in, and interrogating him, the killer had no idea he had killed the mother of the man who gave him a ride. He simply walked through this neighborhood looking for a house that looked empty, and his mother's was the only one without the lights on. It's baffling. Made an account and quit lurking just for this thread. Crime scene tech here. This one stands out as I was still training at the time. Aside by gunshot. Guy went to an indoor range and rented a monster of a revolver, a judge if I remember correctly. This thing could shoot 410-shot shells. The force basically blew the top of his head off. What remained of the skin from the top of his head was flapped into the skull cavity and his eyes looked like they were bulging out. Blood and brains up to 10 feet away. Found his safety goggles about 10 yards downrange. The scariest part was he was watching others shoot beforehand. Sometimes I wonder if he planned to take others with him. I was at a regional medical center in rural Guatemala when we had a case come in from an RTA, road traffic accident, involving a pedestrian and a chicken bus. For those of you who don't know, a popular, but incredibly dangerous, form of public transport are retired American school buses that have been painted all sorts of vibrant colors, but underneath the mechanics are shot to shit. Anyway, this pedestrian had been hit by one of these rolling death traps which was fully loaded going around 80 miles per hour and ended up getting wrapped under the front right wheel arch and completely mangled beyond recognition. They found bits of this guy spread 2 kilometers down the road as the initial impact had split his torso down the middle and basically turned him inside out. When all the bits had been collected, the height of the body bag was around 2 inches, so you imagine the state of the remains. Passers-by helped us pick up bits from the side of the road, but dogs and cats ran off with a fair amount of the smaller bits. Guatemala is a cool place. Not a forensic scientist, but I majored in anthropology with a focus on forensic anthropology. Given that, I was a fairly regular reader of the Forensic Science Quarterly. Here are a couple that I remember. Kid found on top of an elevator in a 6-story dorm. Apparently he was elevator surfing, which is just as dumb as it sounds. He somehow got his head caught in the cables and got it twisted around a couple of times. This did not immediately kill him. He died from asphyxiation. This means he had anywhere from 30 seconds to a couple of minutes to contemplate what had happened to him before he lost consciousness. Another one was sort of a mystery case. Headless corpse found in a truck in a national park. No head was to be found in the immediate area. Truck was turned on but had run out of gas. The wound was very clean, no sawing, almost like a guillotine cut. The investigating authorities were rather confused, but eventually they found a receipt in his pocket for 50 yards of nylon rope. They widened the investigation and eventually found the rope tied to a tree with a noose at one end. Further searching of this area eventually turned up the head. Pretty unique method of SSI. Mystery solved. This one isn't from the magazine, but a story personally related to me from the officer involved. A call comes in for a 50-ish black woman dead in a garage. Investigation reveals it is actually a 35-year-old white male. Dude put on a dress, rigged a noose to his garage door opener and proceeded to watch some porn in his garage while choking himself with the garage door opener. Battery in the remote died, and then so did he. Another case that sticks in my memory is of a guy that decided to kill himself with a .30206 and a .308. For you non-gun people, those are two very powerful calibers. Literally overkill. Anyway, this guy manages to get 2 rifles under his chin and fire them at the same time while lying on his bed. This obliterates his head. I mean, like there was nothing left but a stump. That isn't why the case sticks with me, however. What happened next is that the local forensic departments decides to reconstruct the head as an exercise. They collect every piece, except for the orbital sockets, which evaporated, and put them all back together. The result came out looking very much like the victim, although slightly bug-eyed. The before and after of that is something I don't think I'll ever forget. Not me but my professor. This young kid, teens-ish, was playing with a loaded gun and accidentally shot himself in the face. He then tried to write "help me" on the wall with his blood. So sad. We saw the scene photos for class. Digital forensics case. Executive was using way more data than anyone else on his air card. The local IT guys took it to check it out for viruses and whatnot. Found lots of CP. Guy got brought up on charges, lost his job, family torn apart, the whole spiel. We do our analysis. Find out there was a virus. Ty was serving said pictures for a dark website. Only thing that got him off was the rate at which the data was accessed. He got fat restitution, but that won't put his life back together. Made me get out of the business because although this guy was guilty for sure, but we kept finding little hints that suggested it was something other than what we thought. Had we missed something, he would be in jail as we speak. Couldn't sleep with that kind of burden. I'm a specialty forensics investigator that focuses on fire and explosions. Somehow, a lady with a coffee can of gas, her husband's asphalt-covered work clothes, and a front-load dryer, managed to turn the dryer into a rocket ship that launched through a plate glass window and 10 feet into the road. We have no known models that can demonstrate how the available materials were able to launch the dryer. Attended a lecture by a pathologist once who asked us what household items someone had managed to kill themselves with: a toothbrush, a rubber band, or a matchstick? He went on to tell us that a man had killed himself accidentally while trying to clean his ear out with a matchstick. Punctured a blood vessel, painted a wall with his own blood, passed out and bled out on the sofa. A friend's wife does forensics field work for a sparsely populated area and had said that only one case has been noteworthy. She was asked to analyze a crime scene in a house used to manufacture meth. She surveyed the outside and then proceeded with an officer to the kitchen where the basement door was located. In the basement they found a metal door bolted shut and they decided to call for bolt cutters to enter. They didn't have them at the time, so she kept examining the area and found a side door to THR room behind a furnace. The lock was jimmied open and they found a sawn-off 12-gauge shotgun had been pointed at the bolted door. The gun was loaded and the trip wire still attached to the shotgun. She described it as the most chilling experience of her career. The coolest forensic story I heard was in a forensic math seminar a few years back. This case was, I think, used as inspiration for an episode of Bones. A guy killed his daughter but didn't report her missing until 8 or 9 months later. When they did find her remains, they were able to prove that she had died months before the father claimed that he last saw her because there was a wasp nest in her skull. That particular breed of wasp only builds nests in dry places, so she had to have already been decomposed prior to their nest building season. I'm in 3rd year as a forensic anthropology student, so I don't have my own cases yet, but I've studied hundreds and have been told about some. My professor in advanced forensic methods was one of the leads in the case of Anthony Hardy, who basically killed people, dismembered them and put their body parts in bins that were eventually found by a homeless guy. Another she worked on, actually all I'm going to list were ones she was involved with, involved a man who went to park his car in the garage as he normally did, but his wife's car was in the spot. She refused to move it, so, naturally, he stabbed her about 17 times, put her in his boot and drove off. He explained the blood stains away as being animal blood of something he'd hit, carried home in his boot and cut it up on the garage floor. Obviously this was a crap excuse, as simple blood testing showed it was human. She ran us through the forensics involved in that case and it was quality stuff. One was a man found with his wrist and throat slit, sitting on the floor of his living room, depressed old man. Suicide, right? Wrong. The cut to his throat stopped halfway across and was at an unusual angle. The stopping halfway through is a good sign of holding someone from behind, reaching around and slitting the throat. Stopping halfway is in that position, it's much harder to fight a struggle. Also, the wrist wound had very little blood and was evidently done after the throat slit. The way he was sat showed that it was likely a loved one, as his body was taken care of, as strange as that sounds, and placed in a loving position. Possibly the weirdest one, a woman was found dead in the hall at the bottom of the stairs with blunt force trauma to the skull. There was a large hole in the ceiling above her, and the situation told to the forensic team by the police is that she fell through the loft. In the loft, no boxes were moved and there were loads around the side of the hole. If she fell, she would have grabbed outright. More damning, it was clear by some sawdust and the state of the slats that someone had used a saw to cut through the wood. Also, the blood spatter on the wall was all wrong. Basically what had happened was that her husband had smashed her head in, put her at the bottom of the stairs, cut a hole in the loft, called the police and told them of the accident. He also tried to kill the family liaison officer in the kitchen when the police were there after he realized the jig was up. Seen a lot more stuff, suicides that look like murders but no evidence found, vice versa, bodies found in burnt down buildings, bodies found in a swamp or more from years back, meth labs, even got sort of taught how to make meth accidentally, mass graves, photos of assault/murder victims. It's pretty grim at times. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, show your support. Leave your thoughts and opinions down below.